Welcome to Vaudeville. Sounds like it's a place on a map, doesn't it? Well, Vaudeville is not a town. Not like Greenville or Asheville. Basically, Vaudeville is a type of performing. It's a type of show, a way to put a production together. It's basically a cross between circus acts and a talent show, where you'd sit in the audience and you would watch a performance that would take about 5 to 10 minutes, and that performance would leave and the next performer would come on with very little downtime between the acts. And this would go on for 2 or 3 hours over the course of a day. And that would be a basic vaudeville style performance. Now inside of all these performances, there were different types of acts, and we'll get to that in just a minute. In mainstream vaudeville, African Americans were not usually allowed to take part in any of the productions as either a performer or as audience members. And it would stay this way for well over 50 years.
But with African Americans segregated in the balcony or excluded entirely from the audience, there was no such thing in mainstream vaudeville as a theater full of them. And it was that way for almost a century.
In this time period, black performers struggled to find paying work in mainstream vaudeville. And when they did, they were typically playing stereotyped characters such as Zip Coon or Sambo. And they were stereotyped in these racial contexts. So to understand this a little better, here is a video showing some primary sources. That means these are people from the time period discussing when they performed in vaudeville.
Real African Americans were forced to go along with the myth by wearing ridiculous or stereotyped clothing on stage, and only playing versions of Sambo or Zip Coon.
Because Sambo was the willing retainer. He was that slave who would sing songs like Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. On the other hand, Zip Coon then becomes an aggressive black man who's still ignorant, but is pretentious.
Black performers almost always had to be in a racial context.
I don't know why I feel this way.
Eunice Wilson sings a fine number that has nothing to do with fruits and vegetables. So why does she have to do it in front of giant watermelons?
Now I can go on amongst our views. Now the day will come, say, when you give in. I won't give up because I'm sure to win. Because I don't know why I feel this way.
I remember once I had added a wonderful song called Shoe Shine Boy to my repertoire. And it was a perfect song for a kid of 12, 13 to sing. And I sang this song. I had an arrangement of it with an orchestra and so forth. And I was booked into the Oriental Theater in Chicago. And there was a wonderful theater with a wonderful line of chorus girls and a great choreographer and producer and so forth. And when she heard about the colored boy coming to work at the theater, her mind began to click, apparently, and when I got there, she had a whole big production number about Shoe Shine Boy. And of course, I was in it. And I had to give up my nice arrangement and then perform in her production, which included running up and down the chorus girls in front of them with a shoe shine cloth and shining their shoes. And my nice white tail suit had been tossed aside, and I was wearing some kind of stylized version of tatters and rags. That was my final week in vaudeville.
Now I remember as a kid, you know, hold on there now. Now Sapphire done told me that you owes me a nickel. And I used to go like, why do you talk like, to my mother, why do you talk like that?
Vaudeville is not a place on a map. Any town with a venue large enough, a stage and an audience, they could have their own vaudeville because vaudeville was a style of performing. And they began to pop up around 1860. And like I said before, they featured unrelated acts, and they were made up of comedy routines, dances, puppet shows, magic routines, Las Vegas style dancing. So vaudeville, where did it come from? How did it evolve? Well, that's a complicated question. It has many different answers. Well, let's start with the word vaudeville. It is a French word, this style of performing. But let's think about maybe how this evolved is, say we were a performer right around this end of the Civil War. Let's pretend we're maybe in Las Vegas, and I am a musician and I'm on the street corner performing. And I want you to give me some money, because that's how I'm making my living, sitting on the street and performing. And if there's somebody across the road from me and they have maybe a juggling act, and we're competing for the same money. We're competing for people to give us tips. Well, it would make sense if we maybe work together and then do the show, sell tickets to the show, get other people to perform with us, and this is kind of how I see vaudeville evolving. A few small, unrelated acts found themselves together, and they were fighting for the same audience in their small towns. So these acts decided to work together instead of competing. This caused large groups of audiences to gather, and in turn, they would sell tickets. The acts became mobile because the trains were becoming ubiquitous at this time, and this allowed them to take their show to every town. So now, instead of just being stuck in, say, New Orleans, they could travel from New Orleans to Atlanta, to Charleston, to Athens, and start doing the same show for multiple audiences. So how did vaudeville help in the evolution of jazz? Well, in my opinion, it definitely provided a stage and an audience and some steady pay for musicians and for other performers as well. It provided reason and place for performers to master their craft. If you have to perform every night, then you're getting really good at whatever your art is, whether you're a dancer or a musician. So you get really tight and you become better over time. The better you become, the more you're worth, the more money you can make for your act. The music of vaudeville was also able to be spread across the country so that everybody who saw the same vaudeville performance, whether you were in Boston or Los Angeles, heard the same songs, heard the same jokes. This would not happen again until the movies. Two African Americans who were able to perform and be successful in mainstream vaudeville were Eddie Blake and Bert Williams. In the case of Eddie Blake, he was able to overcome the stereotypes of performing in a Sambo or zip-doon type character by becoming a virtuoso on the piano. A virtuoso is someone who shows almost an unnatural skills and playing abilities on a musical instrument. Just watch this clip of both Eddie Blake playing piano and Bert Williams, who is playing a stereotypical Sambo character. But Bert's excellent acting abilities creates a version of the Sambo character that comes across as more human. His version that does more than just use simple show business-based comedy gags for laughs, but instead he tries to let the audience know that Sambo, the character, represents the way many people who don't know better view black culture. So Bert's version of Sambo is relatable because we see a human side to Sambo, a human side that we all have no matter our color, race, or gender.
Huey Blake always wore a dinner jacket on stage. He was proud of his music and insisted on showing that pride. Of all the vaudeville performers who overcame huge obstacles to achieve success and dignity, the first, the greatest, was Bert Williams. He started out a minstrel in 1893 and by 1910 was the most respected comedian on the American stage.
Bert Williams' Sambo character, although he himself said it was the same shuffling nigger that was being portrayed by other people, was done with such subtlety that he came across as a human being.
Bert Williams mesmerized the audience.
He just seemed to relax, and everyone knew there was going to be a punchline, but he waited and waited, and he milked it for all it was worth. and then he would say the punchline very calmly. And his sense of timing was remarkable.
Sat on his knees, as a matter of fact, when I was about 5 years old. He was a very nice, kindly gentleman, and all business.
In the 1916 film, The Natural Born Gambler, Bert Williams recreated one of his most famous sketches, a mime poker game performed alone.